Greetings everybody, 'tis I, 480 Volts, and welcome to another episode of 480 Reviews. Today we are going to be talking about one of my childhood favorites, and I'm pretty sure it was a childhood favorite of any 90s kid, the one and only Crash Bandicoot. Development for Crash Bandicoot began as early as 1994. Naughty Dog co-founders Andy Gavin and Jason Rubin had noticed that racing, fighting, and shooting games had begun to transition into a 3D environment. Subsequently, they wondered what a platformer would look like in such an environment. Remember, Super Mario 64 had not been released as of yet. With a general idea of the genre and gameplay style in mind, the next question was the protagonist. Naughty Dog wanted to do what Sega and Warner Bros. Did with Sonic the Hedgehog and the Tasmanian Devil and design an animal that was cute, real, and no one really knew about. Eventually, after studying different marsupials, the team decided on a Bandicoot. That's a pretty random choice for your mascot, about as random as a hedgehog. The game was released for the Sony Playstation in 1996, almost a month before the North American release of Super Mario 64. The story is set in an archipelago in Australia, about the only place where you're going to come across a Bandicoot. The three islands are owned by this jerk named Dr. Neo Cortex. Yeah, this knucklehead right here. Dr. Cortex and his boot-licking lackey Nitrous Brio are experimenting with genetic mutation on animals in an attempt to build an army with which they intend to take over the world. Wait a minute, where have I heard that before? One of their experiments goes wrong and a Bandicoot named Crash escapes by jumping out of the window in a display of awesomeness, and then suddenly realizing that gravity is a thing, immediately regrets his decision. Dr. Cortex then orders his lackeys to prepare a beautiful female Bandicoot named Tawna for experimentation. Crash washes to the shore of one of the nearby islands and sets out to kick the big jerk's butt and save the pretty girl. Not exactly an original trope, but hey, it's short, simple, and straight to the point. Crash traverses through all three islands together, defeats Dr. Cortex, who ends up being faced with the same realization regarding gravity that Crash had faced earlier. Tawna is saved, and the two continue on their merry way. I'll just briefly talk about some of the characters. With the exception of Papu Papu, a native of the first island, Dr. Embryo, and Dr. Cortex, the rest of the bosses you face are mutated animal monsters from Cortex's army. Ripperoo is a kangaroo who has undergone far too many sessions of mutation, probably one of Cortex's first victims, and is a little loose in the goose, if you know what I mean. Koala Kong, a hybrid between a marsupial and an ape, is a classic example of all brawn and no brains, and Pinstripe is a gangster-themed marsupial complete with a machine gun. Also worth mentioning is the lab assistant, who, while not a boss, is an enemy you face a couple of times in the final island. He is evidently the result of some kind of genetic cloning. Dr. Cortex may be the guy running the show, but it wouldn't have been possible without Dr. Nitrous Brio. Brio is actually the diabolical genius who invented the technology used to mutate animals, but being the good little weasel he is, he let Dr. Cortex take the credit. As for Cortex, he's nothing too special as a villain, nothing that's never been done before, although I will say I like his model design with his giant letter N on his oversized forehead. The small amount of voice acting was handled by a guy named Brendan O'Brien. It's not superb or anything, but it gets the job done. His voice sounds fitting for Brio, but the first time I heard it, it was not what I had expected for Cortex. Let's talk about gameplay. Aside from two rail stages in which Crash rides on the back of a wild boar, the game consists of running through a linear corridor-like stage. For controls, Crash can run, jump, and a melee attack spin move. That's it. Apparently some have complained over the years that the controls were awkward or clunky, but I really don't see the problem here. The controls may have been a little on the stiff side at times, but I never had any trouble with it. The only major problem I see is that if you've been in the air and you execute a spin as you land, Crash has a tendency to slide a little bit, but that just means you have to be conscious of your surrounding environment. The controls are perfectly tolerable, and anyone who has serious problems really makes me doubt their ability to play games. At least the controls don't feel like they're fighting me as Mario 64 did. There are two types of objects that Crash can affect: crates and enemies. Crates are much like blocks in Super Mario Bros. That contain items for you to collect. You can break most crates and kill most enemies by either jumping on them or spinning them. Whenever you jump on a crate or enemy, Crash will bounce. If you hold down the jump button, Crash will bounce higher. You can chain combos this way by bouncing off multiple enemies before landing. You can also chain combos by spinning an enemy into another enemy or a group of enemies. You can also spin enemies into crates. Let's talk about collectible items. The main item you're going to see saturated all over the stages is Wampa Fruit. These neon-colored, apple-looking things are basically coins. Collecting 100 rewards you with an extra life. Most crates contain one piece of Wampa Fruit or several. Some crates have springs inside them. I'll just refer to these as 10-in-1 crates. Spinning these causes them to break open completely empty, but jumping on them allows you to bounce 10 times, revealing one piece of Wampa Fruit per bounce. There are also trampoline crates marked with a directional arrow pointing up. Jumping on these will launch you several feet into the air. They'll never break until you spin them. There are also TNT crates, jumping on which starts a 3-second countdown, after which a nice explosion that you really don't want to be caught up in. Oh, and spinning these crates is not recommended. Sometimes you may encounter a frame outline of a crate. This usually means that there's a particular crate you need to be on the lookout for. A steel crate marked with an exclamation point. Jump or spin this and the outline crate will solidify into a normal crate for you to break. And crates marked with the letter C are checkpoints. As for enemies, pretty much everything you touch is deadly to you unless you're jumping or spinning. Most enemies are susceptible to either attack, although some require you to jump on them first or not at all, or some you do not want to spin, etc. Aside from enemies, there are also many obstacles, lethal and not, which you can't affect and have to either go around or wait for. In various stages, you can find small wooden Tiki Masks with brightly colored feathers. These masks represent the spirit of an ancient witch doctor named Aku Aku. These masks serve as an extra hit point. While holding a mask, Crash is shielded from one enemy attack. While holding two, Crash is shielded from two. And collecting a third gives Crash a temporary invincibility, after which he is shielded once again from only 2 attacks. Let's talk about the stages themselves. Like any good platformer, there are many different environments such as jungles, ancient ruins, and mechanized power plants. There are also many stage motifs within the different environments. For example, in the jungle stages, you might be casually navigating through a swamp canal or ascending a massive vertical gate, or frantically running from a giant boulder, or riding on the back of a wild boar. In the power plant, you may be jumping over pools of green sludge while dodging electrical current, or navigating through a dark passage with creepy monitors of Dr. Cortex staring at you, or playing 3D Donkey Kong against an overweight clone of Pinstripe. However, many of these motifs are reused in later stages, which are sort of harder, more intense versions of before. For instance, Rolling Stones is a harder version of Jungle Rollers. They're 2 separate stages, but they take place in the same environments, use the same gimmicks, and have all the same aesthetics. In fact, there are only 6 stages that are completely unique, not including the Great Hall or the bosses. The stages are divided up among 3 separate islands, which are completely linear. You start at the beginning of the first island, and each stage is a progression point, allowing you to go further through the island until you can reach the next island. As for boss fights, there are 6 in the entire game, including the final boss. However, the placement seems kind of random. The first boss is just sort of slapped in the middle of the first island, not at the end or even at the halfway point, just sort of towards the end, while the second boss is almost at the very beginning of the second island, and the third marks the end of the second island. The only mathematical patterns I could come up with is, first of all, the number of bosses in a single island directly corresponds to the number of that particular island. 1 boss on the first island, 2 in the second, and 3 in the third. The other pattern I could discern, and I don't know if this was done intentionally or not, but the number of stages in between the bosses seems to alternate between 5 and 4. The first boss takes place after 5 stages, then there's 4 more stages until the second, 5 more until the third, 4 more until the fourth, and 5 more until the fifth, and then there are only 2 more stages until the final boss, and one of those stages is at the Great Hall, which is barely even a stage. As for the fights themselves, you're placed in a small room, the boss has a health meter, and you just have to figure out what hurts and run with it. The first 2 bosses have 3 bars of health, the third has 4, the fourth and sixth have 5, and Dr. Embryo has a whole whopping 9. Brio is definitely one of the most unique fights. You don't even touch the guy for the first 6 bars of health. You just take out these blobs of goo he's created, occasionally dodging some explosive projectiles he throws in your direction. Then with only 3 bars left, he drinks some kind of potion he's mixed and transforms into the flippin' Incredible Hulk, and then the fight becomes much more physical with you actually trying to bop him in the head. That transformation comes out of nowhere though, and it definitely freaked me out the first time I played it. The final boss is pretty epic, you standing on a zeppelin facing off against Dr. Cortex while the third island burns in the background. Now let's talk about the stages themselves. Technically this game is considered to be a 3D platformer, but at least half of the stage takes place in a 2D side-scrolling environment. The 3D stages are linear corridors, meaning you're placed within a fairly narrow path, and the only way to go is from point A to point B. The end of each stage is marked by a teleport pad. The camera moves forward or backward depending on which way you're going, but always remains pointing in one direction, never angling, never panning, never rotating. As for the 2D sections, they're basically Super Mario Bros. There are a few stages that alternate between 2D and 3D. There are 2 stages in which you have to run from giant boulders. In these stages, you're actually running backwards so you can see the imminent danger behind you. And there are 2 stages in which you have to ride a wild boar. These are rail stages in which you are constantly moving forward and can only veer left or right. In all of these stages though, platforming. I'd say the platforming is at its most intelligent in the 2D sections, but the 3D sections are nothing sloppy by any means. Most of the corridors have safety barriers on the side of the pathways, but then you get into the swamp, ruin temples, darkened halls, and generator room, in which cases you are placed on very narrow pathways and going too far left or right can cost you a life. You've also got all the standard platforming gimmicks like moving platforms or platforms that fall if you stand on them for too long, and of course there are pitfalls about every 3 feet it seems like. Never take your thumb too far away from that jump button. Don't be fooled though, there are a few stages that hold secrets that you may never think to look for, like platforms that suddenly appear beneath your feet when stepping out into what appears to be empty air. Sometimes this game definitely requires you to take leaps of faith. Let's talk about the bonus rounds. In many stages, you can find 3 emblems with the character's face, most commonly Tawna, however in a few cases Brio, and in 2 cases Cortex. The emblems are usually found in crates, although a few Brio and Cortex emblems are just floating in midair for you to grab. Collecting 3 of the same emblems in a stage takes you to a bonus round where you traverse through a small 2D section, breaking crates and collecting Wumpa Fruit and lives along the way. At the end of the stage is the person whose face was on the emblems and a teleport pad. Jumping into the pad takes you back to the normal stage where you can continue on your merry way. The crate that contained the 3rd emblem is now a checkpoint. The Tawna bonus rounds are basically your method of saving your progress in the game, but if you slip and fall, you'll be returned to the normal stage having lost your chance to save. This is stupid. The normal way to save is to collect 3 emblems in a stage, which, by the way, are not present in every single stage, go through a separate section, hope you don't screw up, and then save? Well, that's crazy. And while the Tawna stages may not be too difficult at first, some of the later ones get a bit crazy. There is, however, a Mega Man-style password progression system as an alternate method of saving. As for the Brio stages, they serve no purpose other than providing you with a crap ton of lives. They will, however, test your platforming skills to the very max. As for the 2 Cortex rounds, located in Sunset Vista and Jaws of Darkness, these sections end with a small key that you can pick up. Doing so will unlock 2 secret stages on the map, Whole Hog and Fumbling in the Dark. If you try to 100% the game, you'll need these keys, which brings me to the matter of actually scoring 100%. There are 2 ways to beat this game. One is to simply plow through the stages and defeat the final boss. Doing so shows the ending where Crash and Tawna are reunited and put some distance between them and the island fortress. The other way to beat this game is to collect the gems. So all of those wooden crates I mentioned, turns out they have another function besides giving you lives and Wumpa Fruit. Sometimes when you beat a stage, you might see a screen telling you how many crates in that stage you did not break. If you can make it to the end of a single stage without losing a single life and breaking every crate, you will be rewarded with a gem. There are 26 gems in total, 1 for each stage, including the 2 secret stages I mentioned earlier. 20 of those gems are a clear color, looking not unlike a diamond, while the remaining 6 are different colors: green, yellow, orange, pink, red, and blue. Now you might make it through the end of a stage without losing a life and have broken every single crate you could see and still be told at the end that you missed a few. How can that be? You scrounged up every nook and cranny, or at least so you thought. However, I'm willing to bet that on those particular stages you passed by would appear to be 1 or more of those colored gems. From a distance, it appeared to be very small, about the size of Crash's foot, and it got smaller and smaller the closer you got to it, until by the time you were standing next to it, it had completely disappeared. This means that you need to first collect that particular colored gem, which is done in some other stage. For instance, there's a green gem present in Jungle Rollers. To collect the green gem, you'll need to break all of the crates in the Lost City. Now, when you return to Jungle Rollers, the green gem will be much bigger and it won't disappear on you. When you step on it, it will lift you to a higher section where 3 crates you would have never seen otherwise are present. If you're trying to collect every single gem, you'll have to do some backtracking throughout the maps. Also, while I'm aware that the crates in the bonus stages were required to break in the Insane Remake trilogy, they are not required in the original version. So don't worry if you miss crates in the bonus stages. Whatever you think of the game's difficulty setting will change now. When you're trying to collect all of the gems, the game suddenly feels a lot harder. In actuality, it's not so much that the difficulty increases, it's just that the game is now very unforgiving. If you die just once in a stage, oh, and believe me, you will, you lose your chance to get the gem, even if you've broken every single crate. If you pause and exit the stage and then re-enter to the beginning, you can try again. You don't know what frustration is until you've made it almost to the end of a particularly difficult stage, having broken every crate only to slip up and die towards the end and then have to leave and restart the stage from the beginning and hope you don't make the same mistake again. The game lets you know right from the beginning what you're in for, I might add. The very first stage, Insanity Beach, otherwise one of the easiest stages in the game, features one of the lowest and dirtiest tricks Naughty Dog has ever pulled out of their hat. A bridge of wooden crates over a bottomless pit. Oh sure, you can just walk across with no effort, but if you're trying to get the gem, thus having to break every crate, you'll have to break this bridge as you cross it. So it's a bouncing puzzle. It's like the game is telling you, this is what you're in for if you try to reach 100%. This is what you'll have to deal with. Quit now. I'm sure everyone is just waiting for me to start complaining about Slippery Climb, but I'm actually not gonna. See, that stage is hard no matter what, whether you're trying to get the gem or just make it to the end. It's just a hard and cruel stage regardless, and you don't even have to revisit it if you don't want to, as you can get everything in the first go. Now, if you want to talk about frustration, look no further than Boulder Dash and Cortex Power. Boulder Dash requires you to run backwards while being chased by a giant boulder. The track is filled with all sorts of obstacles and pits, and your jumping and steering have to be dang near perfect. If you stop or slow down even once, your goose is most likely cooked, in which case you'll have to restart from the beginning. And each boulder chases you into a tunnel, into which comes to a thudding halt, completely blocking the way you just came in, so if you missed any crates, you won't be able to go back for them. You also can't complete the stage until you've collected the pink gem several stages later. The pink gem sits at the end of the stage by a giant cliff. Stepping onto it takes you down into the pit where you must traverse a small section filled with enemies and pitfalls. More chances for you to die. die. Also, the lighting and depth perception in this pit are not what you're used to, so it's even easier for you to screw up and die. Imagine having outrun every boulder, broken every crate, just to slip up down in this pit at the very end. I speak from experience. It's far more frustrating than slippery climb. Cortex power requires you to have collected the blue gem a few stages later, so your first time playing through, you can just plow to the end. Doing so will take very little time and effort. The blue gem pathway is at a fork in the road, and it ends where the two roads merge together again, which means you'll have to do some backtracking through one of these paths to break all of the crates on either side. And this game is not a good game to backtrack through. The camera remains fixed ahead, so you won't see obstacles or pitfalls behind you until you're almost on top of them. And just before the teleport pad, when you think you can breathe again, the stage pulls another bridge of crates on you. Not cool, Naughty Dog. Not cool. As for all of the clear gems, they appear in the Great Hall. If you don't have all 20, you can just hop onto the teleport pad, which is literally right in front of you. Otherwise, you can take a detour across 20 clear gems, which are placed to form stepping stones over the bottomless chasm below you, until you reach a balcony where Tawna is waiting for you on the back of a giant bird. The ending will show the bird flying Crash and Tawna away from the island, a quick summary of what the bosses are up to now that the game is over, and then the credits. Barely worth the effort if you ask me. Objectively speaking, the graphics are okay. Much of the jungle foliage looks somewhat like construction paper, and for some unknown reason, during the Tawna bonus rounds, butterflies can be seen perching on empty air as if there's an invisible surface beneath them. During the opening cutscene, they appear to attempt some kind of lip-syncing for Dr. Cortex, and then Brio is apparently a ventriloquist. However, there is a significant amount of detail in the background, such as the aforementioned butterflies and little things like pipes sticking out of the wall with green sludge running out. I also love how deliciously wacky and cartoony the villains look, and almost everything is animated, from Crash looking from side to side while you stand still, to Wampa Fruit pieces constantly rotating. From a more personal and biased opinion, the graphics blew me away as a kid. Everything I had played prior to this game came from the Commodore 64, which looked even more pixelated than the NES. Going from that to this was unbelievable. The music was composed by a guy named Josh Mansell. Honestly, it's not that great in my opinion. Most of it is very quiet and sleepy. A few tracks like the main theme, the boulder and power plant stages, and the boar stages are driving enough, but the rest of it just sort of fills space. There is a creative amount of sound effects used in the music, however, like birds, monkeys, and elephants in the jungle stages, tribal chanting in the vertical gate stages, frogs in the swamp stages, bleeps and bloops in some of the power plant stages, and so forth. There's even some attempt at a didgeridoo, because Australia, which has managed to be used at least once in every single Crash game I've played, and the sound used at the very beginning of the opening theme is probably the most iconic sound of the entire franchise. Each boss fight contains its own theme that sort of represents that character. Papu's theme sounds very tribal, Ripperoo's theme is very slapstick, cartoony, Koala Kong's theme has a raging Hulk feel, Pinstripe's theme sounds like a bar fight in an old cheesy gangster film, Brio's theme has sort of a cross between sneaky and foreboding, and Cortex's theme is cold, dark, and ominous. Objectively speaking, this game is pretty good. It's a solidly construction platformer with a lot of wrinkles to iron out. From a personal perspective, however, this game is one of my all-time favorites. I have so much nostalgia for this game. I can hear the opening sound of the main theme or the spin effect or whatever, and it immediately takes me back to my boyhood days. I wasted many an hour of my life playing this game. And although it's not my favorite in the Crash series, it resides in a very special place in my heart, as it was the first game of the series, the first 3D platformer I had ever played, and one of the very first games on the PlayStation that I'd ever played. No matter what I'm feeling, no matter how messed up the world gets, this is a game that I can just pop in at any time and enjoy. It's been there for me through it all. Well, that was Crash Bandicoot. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoyed the review. If you did, roll around on a field of grass, and I will see you guys next time. Pieces.